I know there's been a lot of discussion since Friday's report, that people are being paid to stay home rather than go to work. Well, we don't see much evidence of that. Anyone collecting unemployment who is offered a suitable job must take the job or lose their unemployment benefits.
That's President Biden's response to the latest Republican talking point that government benefits are so generous, would-be workers are staying home to collect them instead of taking jobs. That debate flared up after the monthly employment report came out last Friday, showing the economy added 266,000 jobs in April, a number that sounds good until you remember that the experts were anticipating 1 million new jobs. And now 2 million Americans are set to lose the enhanced federal jobless benefits they've been using to make ends meet. That's because Republican governors in more than a dozen states are moving to cut off those benefits. Our next guest says that's a mistake. Rebecca Dixon is the executive director of the National Employment Law Project. Rebecca, as you know, we're seeing Republican-led states roll back unemployment and other federal aid because they say that assistance is keeping people from going back to work. Even if that's true, I'm not convinced it's a bad thing necessarily. But before we get into that, I want to ask if it's true. Is that what the numbers and, more importantly, what unemployed workers are saying?
Sure. So cutting off these benefits is really short-sighted and cruel. And employers are driving a narrative that is false and simple about a complex issue. Rather than there being a deficiency in the work ethic of unemployed workers, the evidence really points to challenges around our care infrastructure and women actually not being able to return to the workforce because of care issues, as opposed to there being some issue with employees.
And if that federal aid is giving Americans greater license to be more selective about job possibilities, whether that's in quest of safer conditions or lower possible exposure to COVID, better pay and benefits, or whatever the case may be, is that a bad thing for workers or for the economy?
So an interesting thing to know about the UI system is that there is a requirement to search for suitable work. Now, that requirement was suspended in some states earlier in the pandemic, and states are starting to reinstitute it. But what that basically does is it says that to continue to get UI, workers have to actually be searching for work, but they have to search for suitable work, which means they can't be forced to take a job that pays substantially lower than what they were making before, and they can't be forced to go to a job that's unsafe.
So the battle lines are pretty clear in this debate. The workers and advocates say if you pay people more, keep them safe, give them benefits, give them a better environment, workers will return. Businesses and their advocates say that by the time that happens, so many businesses may be in so much trouble, there might not be enough jobs for the people who'll be looking. And both arguments make sense casually if you're listening. You're an advocate for workers. Why is the argument from employers incorrect?
The reasons that folks aren't returning to work are complex. And just because they have benefits, that's not necessarily the reason. We know that vaccination is uneven, that some jobs are more dangerous than others, and we know that these benefits are crucial to keeping families afloat right now who are struggling. We know that millions of families entered the new year owing $6,000 on average in back rent and utilities. And these benefits are crucial to keeping families in their homes and also to boosting the economy where they are in these states.
Do you think those businesses and the elected officials siding with them are being dishonest or disingenuous? Are you suggesting they're putting profits over the well-being of their workers?
I think they're just looking at one side of the story and looking at incomplete information.
A decade ago, I was reporting from Greenwich Village on the 100th anniversary of the Triangle Factory shirtwaist fire, which, of course, while tragic, helped spark the organized labor movement, and we know about its successes and then the later declines in labor unions in recent decades. In a lot of ways, it feels like this current moment is another flashpoint in the labor movement, except it's not organized. It's not being done by unions. Workers are just responding individually to their own concerns. Am I wrong to think of it that way? And how much more of a voice would workers have right now if we still had a vibrant, healthy union voice in these arguments?
You're absolutely right that workers have been leading the the charge around these benefits and around lots of supports that they need during the pandemic. And they've been absolutely standing up and saying they will not put up with unsafe conditions during this pandemic. If we had unions, there would be a much more coordinated way for workers to join together and to put their voices together to change conditions. And so what we're seeing is a response to this moment and shift in our labor market where workers are actually reconsidering whether they want to work in low-paid jobs that have insecure hours where you don't know how many hours you're going to work from week to week, and they're actually looking for jobs in different industries that provide better benefits and better pay. And that's good for the economy.
You mentioned earlier in the interview, Rebecca, about the nation's care infrastructure, saying it's not back in place on the other side of the pandemic. What do you mean by that? What is the care infrastructure?
We know that a lot of child care centers closed at the outset of the pandemic, and they're not back up. And the other thing we know is that of April, at least a quarter of schools have not gone back to school in person. So we know that women are the ones who are doing the lion's share of the caregiving work, and they're the ones that we saw in the last jobs report that were not returning to the labor force. So we saw an uptick in jobs and returning to jobs in the industries where the employers are complaining. So leisure and hospitality actually saw a huge uptick in jobs in the last month, but those jobs went to men, and that's what points to the care infrastructure being something that's stopping women from getting back in.
I also keep thinking about health care. So many Americans over the past year have had to face both a public health crisis, which then has often become an individual medical crisis, without health insurance that's so often tethered to employment in the U.S. system. I keep wondering why we haven't had more of a robust debate this past year about decoupling health coverage from employment. I'm curious your thoughts.
I think that workers have so many things to contend with, and they've focused on the most basic ones like housing, food, utilities, and they haven't really had the opportunity to turn to healthcare because these other things are so pressing.
Is that a debate you think whose moment has come? Would this be the time for that debate?
I think it absolutely is the time. We're finding out that there is not a lot of rights that workers have around health and safety in the workplace. And we know that OSHA did not issue a standard that was enforceable. So workers still currently don't have a standard that's enforceable where they can enforce or have the right to have PPE or distancing on the job. So healthcare and health are really important to this. And worker health is public health. That's one thing this pandemic has made super clear to us.
And finally, Rebecca, for workers unemployed in those Republican-led states that are beginning to pare back those benefits, do you think that it's going to work? Do you think it is going to force people back to work, or have we faced a reckoning where even that might not incentivize workers enough?
I don't see it forcing people back to work. Actually, shutting off the benefits is not going to get our child care infrastructure back up and running. That's actually not going to get schools reopened. So we're actually aiming our fire at the wrong thing.
Rebecca Dixon is the executive director of the National Employment Law Project. Rebecca, I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And up next on RFL, the pipeline is back online, but does that mean gas lines and higher prices are a thing of the past? After the break, the very latest on the cyber attack that disturbs supply for tens of millions of Americans.